I'm Dave Baker.
And I'm Spandrew Spice.
Welcome to Deep Cuts, the podcast where we pick a topic and walk you through the ins, the outs, and the nitty-gritty so you can appear like an interesting and idiosyncratic person at your next forced social function. Today's topic is...
Nub City.
What was Nub City? Well, through the middle of the 20th century, one town in the Florida Panhandle was home to an inordinate high number of insurance claims. Why was this? Well, the primary occupation of Vernon, Florida was self-mutilation.
Cut my arm into pieces. This is Nub City, Florida.
Act 1. Home Sweet Home. Vernon, Florida is located in the iconically named Washington County, Florida. As of 2018, the U.S. Census Bureau has an estimated population of 690 people. The town is named after, as you might assume, George Washington's hallowed Virginia home, Mount Vernon. The city sits on the Holmes Creek, where in the 1880s, it was used as a shipping route to Bonifay and other nearby towns. The creek was also used to ship gopher tortoises due to the high value of their shells. However, this once thriving community struggled to maintain its equilibrium after a certain point due to the decisions of the townspeople. Vernon seems like a fairly normal name. However, it's also known by another moniker, one that is distinctly more theatrical in tone: Nub City.
When you do improv, a lot of the time, this isn't like a universal thing, but many improv teams will like choose animals for every person as like your induction into the group. Like when you fully get on the team or whatever, you have like an animal and it's like supposed to like represent your personality or whatever. And frankly, I find this a little insulting because I feel like this has always been done to me. But my animal that I was given on an improv team I was on was just the platypus, because it was like, they're so unique and strange or whatever, which I just feel like is just a very generic thing that people say whenever you aren't just like a basic bitch. It's like people act like you're just weird. But if you were to graduate into an improv team, I think that your animal would be the gopher tortoise.
I would, if that happened, I want you to know that I would immediately quit said improv team.
If you were given the gopher, I mean, to be honest, I wanted to quit whenever I got it too. It's a really dumb thing. It's not cool at all. But I think that's what I think that's what you would get.
But aren't gopher tortoises like small turtles?
Where's the lie?
You son of a bitch. You son of a bitch. Like I could even put down with like, all right, monkey or some goofy ass fucking
monkey?
dog. Like I don't know, because I'm fucking small and I'm loud or whatever. I don't know. I could see somebody saying something like that. I don't think anyone looks at me and goes, that guy's very slow.
I mean, turtles are faster than you think they are.
This is such weird gaslighting. This is you passing on the trauma from some asshole trying to convince you that a platypus wasn't an insult. This thing that you're telling me isn't a real tradition in the fucking improv space. This is like everybody pulling a fucking practical joke on you, and you got super hurt and you never recovered from it because you're like, I'm not a fucking platypus. Platypuses are fucking crazy looking. And now this is you passing this on to me, trying to be like, no, turtles aren't slow, Dave. What are you, fucking gaslighting me?
I mean, parts of that may be true, but it definitely is a tradition.
Vernon, Florida, aka Nub City, gained the name throughout the 1950s and 60s when an inordinately high number of its residents lost their limbs due to, in air quotes, tragic accidents, meaning that at some point the residents of Vernon became aware of the idea of insurance fraud and then went to town. Initially, residents would receive a payout here or there, a couple $1,000s due to a grazed hand by a bullet or an accidental gun misfiring hitting somebody in the foot. However, as the money started to pour in, so did the self-mutilation, and it eventually went to a whole new level. Spandrew, this story is insane. This story is crazy. When did you first hear about Nub City?
I don't know. It's one of those stories, and I don't know if you have things like this where you hear about it somewhere, like passingly. Like all I heard was like surface level information about this. There was this town where all these people, there was this high number of people who would have insurance claims for like amputations or losing limbs. And it was kind of like a thing where I was like always at the, like I kind of put it on the back burner of like, one day I'm going to go learn more about that because that sounds fucking crazy. And it just kind of never did. And I don't know where it came from. I don't know where the first time I heard of it or anything like that. It's just one of those stories that's just been kind of like kicking around in the back of my mind for a long time.
I feel like this is one of those stories, like, do you remember there's that town, I think it's called Gibsonville or Gibbville I think it's also in Florida, but maybe Georgia, where it was a town filled with circus performers, like little people who were circus performers and ex-giants who were circus performers. And after the 1950s, a lot of the circuit for circuses died down and sideshows died down. So they all kind of like knew each other and they were like, hey, we're all moving to this little town. Like, come stay with us in the town. And like a lot of the people in this little township were all, sideshow freak people and, bearded lady. One of the main guys in the town, I think he was eventually arrested for double murder. Yeah, the Lobster Boy.
Yeah, Lobster Boy. Yeah, he had deformed hands that resembled lobster claws, or at least that's what they said when he was in the circus. And yeah, he murdered his wife, I think.
Yeah, I think he murdered his wife, yeah, who was also a little person performer.
Yeah, and he was just like an angry, belligerent guy who would just get into fist fights daily, and he was a drunk, and then he ended up just killing his wife.
Yeah, he basically got drunk, flew into a rage, and then either accidentally or purposefully murdered his wife. And then there's like a whole behind the scenes drama with him where he got arrested, but then he got off of the murder because of, basically he claimed like, you're being prejudiced against me because I'm a little person who has this malformed hand thing. And like, I think he maybe even had like, I might be making this part up, but I think his legs were also conjoined in some way. But that feels a step too far. But regardless, like the town, police officer or sheriff or whatever was like a former circus worker who also had some idiosyncratic thing where he was a giant or a little person or a whatever. And I feel like in some ways, like that story and Nub City are like cousins, like they both have this kind of American heartland, idyllic, picturesque background where you think of America in the 1960s as this kind of, thriving post-war baby boomers in power and their, flower power taking over, systems of oppression starting to be dismantled with Jim Crow and everything starting to be really fought against, the civil rights movement happening. And like it's mass chaos, but it's also like heading in the right direction. And there's this very kind of patriotic idea of America in the middle century. And, obviously there were horrible things that were happening at that time, but it was also like they were happening so we could move in a positive direction, right? The Greatest Generation.
Yeah, there was an upward trajectory towards a more progressive world.
Yeah, it was fighting for a more progressive world, and there was a big culture backlash against the systems that had come before, and so there you get these interesting kind of conflicting ideas of America where you have these small towns that are worst case scenario ding 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 deliverance, but then you also have these major metropolitans that are fostering new thought and colleges promoting discussion in the country. And you have these weird pockets like this of, Gibbville or Gibsonville or whatever, where it's, America prior to the 19th century was like a weird feudal land where you would have, bearded ladies put on display and people come and gawk at them. Like, what a weird, horrible thing that is, just like monetizing body shame. What the fuck is going on with our culture? This is horrible.
Yeah, and there's a few other ones like that aren't necessarily even aren't even necessarily of that time. Like there's a thing that happened that kind of reminds me of both of these things. I think in the either the late 90s or the early 2000s, and it was basically like there was this town in I think Washington or Oregon that like this specific town just tended to like generally swing more libertarian and was just really into like the idea of like low taxes. And then there was a couple of these key libertarian figures who saw that this town was generally more concentrated libertarian than any other town in the country, and decided to basically move in and like do a land grab and turn this into like a libertarian utopia. And they like went in and they bought up a bunch of stuff and privatized everything and just literally turned this into like a weird libertarian stronghold where there was just like no city government and no city or state funding, and it was all just like all just like run by like libertarian ideals. And then like they ended up just like getting overrun with bears because they were in Oregon where there's bears, and they completely gutted all of the regulations about like feeding bears basically. And so the town just got overrun with bears.
That doesn't even sound real. Like, that doesn't even sound like... That sounds like if you pitched that in the writer's room on an episode of The Simpsons, they'd be like, I don't know. That seems a step too far.
Sounds a little unrealistic. Well, definitely true. And definitely just like, the thing that, what's interesting is like, even like the Gibsonville or whatever that thing is, even that like makes a little bit more sense to me, because they all sort of like, it was this community of people who were no longer going to be able to have this nomadic lifestyle because this idea of circus sideshow freaks was falling out of favor. And people were like, actually, this is kind of fucked up and maybe we shouldn't do this anymore, which I think is like ultimately a net positive decision. But it, at the time it did affect the livelihoods of this group of people. And so they all kind of decided like, oh, we're going to go and live. Like that makes at least that makes a little sense, like why they did that. But Nub City or Vernon, Florida, and to a certain degree, this other place, the libertarian place, it's fascinating to me that it's like there was just like this. It almost reminds me of like it reminds me of Uzumaki, where like the whole idea of like this weird synchronicity where everybody in this town just like all the planets aligned, and just everybody was just in the right place at the right time, and just everything fell into place where all these people just started becoming obsessed with spirals. And it led to this like mass event happening in this town that just spiraled further and further out of control. And it kind of reminds me of that in a way, where it's like, it's so strange that like, because insurance fraud is something that's been manipulated and taken advantage of for hundreds of years. People have been pulling insurance fraud schemes since insurance existed, basically. But the idea that like all of these people in this town just like, they all just kind of slotted into place to the point where this whole idea of committing insurance fraud became like a trend in this town specifically is so fascinating to me. The idea that it's just like all these electrons are just firing out everywhere, and then they all just happen to like align in a particular way, and all 700 of these people were just like, let's fucking cut off our arms. Like, that's so insane to me.
I completely agree, but just for the record, so the name of the town is Gibsonton, Florida, which is often shortened to Gibtown, Florida. It's in the Hillsborough County area of Florida, which is down in the center of the state, whereas the Vernon is at the top in the Panhandle. And it's exactly like what we were saying. A lot of people from all over that were involved in the sideshow / circus world moved there and started a new life. And specifically, the person we were referencing, the lobster boy, is named Grady Stiles. Grady Franklin Stiles Jr. was born June 27th, 1937, and died November 29th, 1992.
Yeah, I do remember that. He lived very long.
Yeah, his deformity was a genetic condition called ectrodactyly, in which his fingers were fused to form claw-like extremities. And Stiles was an alcoholic and was from an abusive family. Due to his ectrodactyly, he was unable to walk. So maybe his legs were phased together, or kind of together, I guess. While he sometimes used a wheelchair, he most commonly used his hands and arms to maneuver around. He developed a substantial upper body strength because of that, and when combined with his bad temper and alcoholism, it made him highly dangerous. In 1978 in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, Stiles shot and killed his oldest daughter's fiance on the eve of their wedding. He was brought to trial where he openly confessed to killing the man and was convicted of third-degree murder. He was not sent to prison as no state institution was equipped to care for an inmate with ectrodactyly. Stiles was instead sentenced to house arrest for 15 years and 15 years of probation. Stiles stopped drinking thereafter, and during this period remarried his first wife, Mary Teresa. However, he soon began drinking again, and his family claimed that he had become even more abusive. In 1992, Teresa, together with her son from a previous marriage, Harry Glenn Newman Jr., hired a 17-year-old sideshow performer named Chris Wyant to kill Stiles for $1,500. Wyant was convicted of second-degree murder and sentenced to 27 years in prison. Harry Newman was given life in prison for his role as the mastermind, and Teresa was given 43 years in prison for conspiracy to commit murder.
Holy shit.
That is a story. Wow. So he didn't even die of old age. He died because he got murdered, right? Is that what that means?
I think that's what it was. I think that's what it said.
Stiles' son, Grady Stiles III, disputes the claim that Teresa had him murdered. According to him, his mother, Teresa, and father were arguing. Teresa had said, "Something needs to be done." Teresa's son overheard this and went to a neighbor and repeated those words. Shortly thereafter, Stiles smoked a cigarette while watching TV on the sofa, and a neighbor entered the home with a semi-automatic pistol and shot him in the head twice, killing him. Stiles was reportedly widely disliked in the community, so much so that only 10 people came to his funeral and nobody volunteered as a pallbearer for his coffin.
Jesus.
That is the wildest thing I have read in a long time. What the fuck?
So it wasn't that he killed his wife. It says wife killed him after he killed some other person.
After he killed his daughter's fiance. Yeah. Wow. Grady Stiles. Come for the Vernon leg amputation, stay for the Lobster Boy murder suicide. Jeez, that is dark, man. It was reported in Vernon that one resident received upwards of $1 million for amputating a foot. You must be wondering to yourself, but how did they get away with it? Well, simple. No jury would ever believe that someone would be poor enough to cut off their own foot. The phenomenon grew and grew throughout the small town until it started negatively impacting the economic health of the township. The steamboats that had previously meandered through stopped passing by. The railroad shut down, and even the sawmill, the main source of employment, closed its doors, thus requiring everyone to start cutting off limbs. As the town continued to experience economic hardship, so did the individuals within it, and so the self-mutilations continued and increased. Eventually, this information about the scams and mutilations got to an insurance investigator for the Continental National American Insurance Group. He was brought in to survey the people. John Joseph Healy showed up in Vernon around the time that the claims crossed the $100,000 mark. So, what were his views on the town?
Vernon's second largest occupation was watching hound dogs mating in the town square. Its largest was self-mutilation for monetary gain.
In one report, he even went so far as to write,
"To sit in your car on a sweltering summer evening on the main street of Nub City, watching anywhere from 8 to a dozen cripples walk along the street, give the place a ghoulish and eerie atmosphere." I really just have to point out again that the convergence of everyone settling on this as the solution is absolutely mind-blowing to me. I understand the idea of a town racked with economic hardship, people doing desperate things to try to make a living or survive. I mean, the most obvious thing that you think of that people do when they are experiencing economic hardship to a very extreme degree is theft. That's a thing. That's just the immediate thing that you turn to whenever you're too poor to afford anything is oh, well, I just have to start stealing stuff, stealing food and things to sell to try to make some kind of a living. And obviously that's very demonized in our society. People place a moral charge on something like theft. Like you're a bad person if you steal, even though most people steal not because of some weird thrill that get out of it or because they just love stealing, but because they're like so poor that they just like have to. But the idea that everybody just kind of like somebody did this and everybody else was like, huh. And it just like, it went around this town like a virus of like, oh, like we could do that. Like I could just cut off my arm and I could make some money. Like it's just so mind blowing that they settled on that as the solution.
Capitalism, baby.
Yeah, and it's like there's obviously who knows, hundreds, thousands of other towns in the United States experiencing a similar level of mass economic downturn, and they're all like these little petri dishes, and you see like little trends popping up, like certain towns that are experiencing poverty, you know, there will be this uptick in like drug use because people are, you know, trying to get out of, you know, they're trying to escape from the daily hell of their lives, and they get a hold of like cheap drugs, and that's just the way that they are able to do it. And like I said before, there's towns where like thefts and like things there will be a spike in thefts because of people experiencing poverty. And the fact that this one specific town, out of all these petri dishes, was just settled on cutting off their limbs. Like, what are the chances of that? What are the odds? I'd be really curious to know what the odds are of that becoming the thing.
It really is depressing on a bone deep level too, because you're like, oh, these people feel like they have no other
deeper than
recourse.
bone, through the bone,
clean
cut.
Because they feel like they have nothing to offer and they have no way out. Like this is some fox caught in a bear trap style chewing through your own leg logic. Like it's easy to say like, oh, they're doing this for $1 million. They're getting rich. Fucking idiots. Like, no, dude, that is the wrong way of looking at this. This is like, oh, these people have nowhere else to turn, and the only place that they can try and provide for their families and find security is by removing pieces of themselves.
Yeah, and like the person who got $1 million, like they did that by cutting off their foot. Like, I mean, there's no limb that you could cut off that would be convenient, like, or completely life altering, and certainly, you know, psychologically traumatizing to do that on purpose. But like cutting off your foot, like you have irreparably disabled yourself for the rest of your life in a way that is like massively life changing. Like they got $1 million, and I don't recommend doing this. I'm not like advocating for cutting off your foot, but like that's fucking extreme. Like you got to be, whatever the monetary value at the end of it was. Like I don't think that they shot for $1 million. That's probably just what they got. But like the amount of desperate you have to be to cut off your own foot to make some money.
That kind of makes sense to me though. Like if you look at the math of, I have a family, there's no jobs in Vernon, there are 700 people, I can't afford to drive to another town or city to like, you know, take the risk of setting myself up for a new job. Like I don't have any skills because the American education system has completely failed me. I don't have any connections anywhere. So really, I'm just like going to starve. In Vernon, Florida, in the 1960s, $1 million could last you the rest of your life. Like full on. Not only would it last you the rest of your life, but if you used it well, you would have a house that you could will to your heirs. You would have, you would be living good. So it's the difference between like, oh, I'm going to starve in a fucking pit, or like we're going to live in a mansion and I don't have a foot. Okay, bye-bye. This little piggy went to the bank. Like, no, thank you. Bye-bye, foot. Like that makes sense to me.
And that's a good point too, because like, contrary to this like bootstrapping mentality that a lot of people have, that like poor people are morally bad and they're lazy, and the way that you get out of poverty is by working hard, which like, in some ways that's true. Like for sure, like I'm sure there's many scenarios where working very hard could change your life in many ways. But for the most part, at a top down level, just statistically, if you are born poor, you are going to stay poor. Like, it's very hard, and it gets increasingly hard every year or every decade. I guess more accurate to like trace it by decade rather than like year by year. It gets worse every decade. It is very hard to like break into the next social class or economic class in the United States. Like, you are likely going to stay poor if you were born poor. There's like a magnet pulling you down, and only very extreme circumstances would help propel you out of that to the next economic class. So the idea of like, even if this specific town wasn't experiencing this massive poverty epidemic, like I can basically like sacrifice my foot at the altar of capitalism to set up my family, my bloodline, to have generational wealth, or even generational just some kind of foundation, so that like my family isn't like fucking like hammered with poverty for the next 50 years or whatever.
And it's also, you know, these people weren't moving out of Vernon. Cost of living in Vernon, I'm sure, was not expensive. It's expensive when you don't have any money, but when you have $1 million or even $50,000, in 1960, you could make $50,000 last a long time. You know, like in something we're going to talk about later, there's a Vernon resident who talks about how he bought a house. And like, he's just been living in the house and he doesn't pay taxes and he fucking loves it because he's just like hanging out in this house for like forever. Amazing. Like, good for you, man. That's great. And it's really, especially as, you know, some sort of patriarch or matriarch of a family, I can totally see why someone would be like, I have all these people depending on me. Okay, I'm going to shoot myself in the hand and get $100,000 and we're going to, you know, buy a house or whatever.
Yeah, it's almost like religious when you sort of frame it like that, where it's like this idea of like making a sacrifice to like bring good fortune to your family for, you know, generations.
Yeah, it's you're sacrificing a limb to the uber capitalist, you know, boar that rules all of American identity, you know, for the entirety of our country's existence, ostensibly.
Yeah, it's also like it's also kind of the extreme fucking deep Florida version of that Billy Joel song Allentown, because, you know, Allentown is about just throughout the 70s and 80s, the like factories in Pennsylvania, like car manufacturers shutting down and going overseas, and all these people, you know, their parents and their parents' parents all worked in these factories and they all start shutting down. So they just like, they have no future. It's like that, except for they cut their foot off.
Yeah, it's like if Billy Joel directed that movie with the trains where they had to cut their arms off. What the fuck is the name of that movie?
Trains?
Bong Joon-ho, based on a French graphic novel.
Oh, Snowpiercer?
Watch this. Yeah, it's like if Billy Joel directed Snowpiercer.
I was gonna say it's like if Billy Joel directed Audition.
Ugh, woof. Audition. I can't get down with that. Woof. Not into it.
Yeah, that movie's hard to watch. I watched it once and that was enough. And we're living here in Vernon town, and they're shutting all the factories down, and I'm cutting off my fucking foot. Sorry, on a good day I could pull that off, but I'm sick and my voice is all fucked up, so I couldn't pull that off. Sorry, I'm so sorry.
Yeah, well, you also fucked up because your lyrics weren't making a blood sacrifice to the blood god in the sign of a giant bloody dollar bill or something like that, you know.
And I'm making a sacrifice to the blood god so my family won't die.
By the mid-1960s, 50 people in the town's 700 residents were members of the Nub Club. Murray Armstrong, swear to God that's the guy's real name. His name is literally Murray Armstrong, an insurance official from Liberty National who investigated the claims coming from the Florida Panhandle at the time, recalled,
"There was a man who took out insurance with 28 or 38 companies.
However, it was impossible to convict any of these people because no one would believe that a person could be this desperate."
It's actually interesting because so during the Great Depression, so like 30 years before this, back in the 1920s and 1930s, there was also this huge uptick in insurance fraud because, once again, people were super poor, super desperate, and people would, I don't think there was any like people amputating limbs, but people would literally like abduct homeless people, get them to sign papers like saying that they were their brother, and then like murder them, and then collect like life insurance policies on them and stuff. That was like a very common thing that happened in the 1930s.
That's dark. That's really dark. That's the ultimate sacrifice to the blood god. Oof. Woof. So, what put an end to Nub City? Simple. Capitalism. The unholy specter over all of these happenings. The residents of Nub City were eventually forced to shut down their practice due to insurance premiums.
That's where they get you.
Act 2. Vernon, Florida, the movie. In the 1980s, filmmaker Errol Morris got wind of this story and decided to make a documentary about the town and its inhabitants. He initially went down there to make a doc called Nub City, but the entire town fought him. He eventually got jumped by a Marine, the son of a Nub Club member, and received multiple death threats. So he decided to pivot the film into making a snapshot of the small town. So we're going to watch this clip from the film that was ultimately released, which was released in 1981, called Vernon, Florida. And the movie itself makes no reference to any of the Nub Club story. It just kind of like shows the inhabitants of the town in their daily lives in these bizarre interview sections.
Oh, I've seen them. I take them up, scoop them up, put them in do them up like brains. You're buying brains. But there's a bowl right here, and there's a bowl here, a bowl here, and a bowl there. Now, they're connected to the spine. The spine goes down the backbone. And if all four of these bowls of brains, if all four of them is functioning, you're not a one-track mind. You're a four-track mind. And you could, I see a lot of folks, they could type one letter, write me a letter and you a letter on the type machine, and writing on one way with this hand, and writing your letter with this hand and my letter with that. And I could take pencil and sit down and write with this hand and okay, that was at the same time. Two pencils. I've done that a lot of times. And these brains, now what I was telling you was I can't stand up just I don't believe without propping against something. It gets me out of balance. I had to get something. And you run one, now if you ain't got that, and I've offered all over this town, time and again, $20 to anybody do it. You run that footer in a circle this way, and then your hand right to the reverse. Then they just pick up the pistol and go and shoot, get a look in the eye, and singing a song. That's four. In other words, it's five things. That's five things I can do on this, on one, with this old knot up here.
That uncannily reminded me of one of my sons telling me a story.
Yeah, that's actually that's a good pull. I don't know what to do with like most of what that guy was saying, but man, it's so fascinating the monotonous, monotone, bizarre cadence that the people in this town that have this extremely thick accent have. Like, they're all telling these weird stories, and they're all kind of like, it's like they're all kind of cute, if that makes sense. Like, they're kind of cute, but there's also something like weird and sinister to them. Like, one guy is a turkey hunter and he calls them gobblers, And he just spends like 20 minutes of the movie talking about, you gotta go and kill them gobblers. You just gotta get them gobblers, you just gotta get out there and just get them gobblers, And it's just so mesmerizing, but also like at the end of it, you're kind of like, what did I watch? What did that guy say? He just said nothing. But it was so mesmerizing, and he was so weird, and he was just talking about killing turkeys, and like that guy talking about getting shot in the head and your brain exploding.
No, that he was talking about. So basically, what he was saying was, some people have these 4 different parts of their brains, and if they're all connected if they're all connected and working, then you can do 4 things at once. And so you could be like writing 2 different letters to do to 2 different people, and then at the end, he was basically like. He was making a clockwise circle in the dirt with his foot. He was making a counterclockwise circle with his hand, and then he was miming like cooking something on the stove. And then he was saying that he would sing a song. So he was basically saying like, I can make a clockwise circle with my foot, a counterclockwise circle with my hand. I can cook something on the stove and sing a song at the same time because my brain has 4 different things. Like there's like 4 different things my brain can do at once. That was what he was saying basically, and I believe him. I believe him fully. I think that he can do that.
So fucking strange though. Like they all kind of have these weird like, yeah, let's watch some of this guy talking about fucking killing gobblers.
I said, well, y'all just leave my gun here. I got to use the bathroom. I said, you got to come back the same way. They said, yeah. All right. I got my gun. I didn't get to use the bathroom, though. I was fixing to. But right out in them pines, I heard one gobble. And they had done left. And I said, my God. Boy, that's the best diarrhea medicine in the world. You hear turkey gobbling, you forget all about diarrhea and everything. Headaches, anything. I cure anything. And I grabbed my gun and I tore out. I must have went a quarter of a mile, went through a bunch of pines, and he double gobbled. Well, I knew right then that I had a pretty good chance of killing him. Hey, man, it hadn't been 30 minutes since one had been killed. Bless your heart, next time he gobbled, there he was right out there in them wiregrass and broom sage. I just yelped real low to him. He gobbled. Coming right straight toward me. He wasn't walking, he wasn't running. It was sort of in a little fast trot. And I had a good blind, some palmettos. I sat behind some palmettos. I done had my gun on him, And when he got up there, he was walking a little too fast to shoot him because I wanted a sure shot. And what I done, I just whistled. And he stopped, and he looked, and when he looked up, that was the end of it. Pow. And that's him right there in the middle with about 11-inch beard.
Yeah, they're just these hypnotically mundane stories. Like the lack of self-awareness to not realize that there's like not a human being on this earth that would be interested in what you're saying somehow makes it deeply fascinating.
Yeah, it laps itself.
Yeah, the fact that I like couldn't possibly care about what he's talking about makes me like uniquely interested in what he's talking about, and I'm hanging on every word. Like what happened to the turkey or the gobbler?
Yeah, man, what happened to that fucking gobbler, bro? It's fascinating. It's an interesting movie. You can find it on the internet. It's pretty easy to find. It's called Vernon, Florida. But it's in relief of the other story. It has all this like if you're just watching it, it's exactly what you're saying. Like if you're coming to it blind, knowing nothing about the town, knowing nothing about the people, knowing nothing about this fact that Errol Morris got fucking jumped by an ex-Marine who was the son of a guy who was a part of the Nub Club or is a part of the Nub Club, and then
the cinematographer like almost like someone tried to run him down with their car. Like they were filming and somebody just like tried to run him over with their car.
So the fact that it's so mundane and like totally not about that other stuff is like kind of weird and dark, where you're just like, oh, they're like, we don't want any problems. We're just going to show a guy talking about gobblers.
Yeah, well, it's weird. Yeah, because it's like he went there to make a movie about like this town that had this inordinately high number of insurance claims for amputating accidents. And they were just like, fuck you, get the fuck out of here, which honestly is kind of understandable. It's like, you know, leave us alone. Like a bunch of people, our like moms and dads did this desperate shit back in the 60s because they were so poor. Like, don't come in here and try to exploit this. Like, just leave us alone. Like, I get it. Try to run somebody down with your car is a little extreme, but I get the attitude. I get the sentiment. But then like to then be like, okay, fine. Please don't kill us. I wonder what the motivation was to like follow through and still like just because they had the budget and so they just made the movie anyway. Like I wonder what the motivation was to just like follow through and make this other movie that's just kind of like almost like a little bit of a softball. Like we're just going to cover the mundane, the mundane slice of life of this small Florida town.
Well, I'm sure a portion of that is we have a completion bond where we have to deliver a finished thing at a certain date, or else we're liable for the money that we took as investment to make this documentary.
Yeah, and we don't want to get killed.
So we have to make something.
We're gonna make a puff piece. Like weird little documentary.
But saying it's a puff piece isn't accurate either. It's not like they were like, Vernon, Florida, the greatest place on earth. Like it's a weird like art installation about how strange.
But that's kind of the thing though, is like, I don't know, because to me it more comes off like the camera is like a captive audience to this person rambling about something that nobody cares about. Like I mean to us it comes off as weird. But I don't think they think that they're weird, and it almost feels like oh, like we're just gonna film these people just being very strange and just like showcase the mundane oddity of this small town, and more like, all right, well, just say whatever you need to say, like this is your show, whatever you want to say, just say it and we'll record it. It almost feels like the camera is just like a hostage to these people telling these strange, mundane stories.
I think there is a component of that, but I think saying that that's not a choice on Errol Morris's part is doing a disservice to objectively one of the best documentary filmmakers of the past history of the medium. You know, like
I get that, but I don't know. The documentary doesn't feel like that to me. Like the documentary feels kind of phoned in to me.
I mean, I liked it. I don't know. I think
it's fascinating for sure, but it's fascinating because it's just a camera sitting on these people telling these very hypnotically bizarre and mundane stories. Like it doesn't feel like there's much going on beyond that.
I think there totally is. Like the opening shot of the movie where there's that car driving towards camera for like 3 minutes in slow motion as the weird humming music plays and the car is spewing out all of this, white smoke. Like, he's making a statement about how hard it is to live in these towns and the economic trials, and also how weird these people are, and like the kind of beauty in the mundane. And also, the interesting things that these people get up to. Like he's definitely making a statement. I don't know that it's as interesting as dudes cutting their fucking feet off to support their family.
Yeah, I mean, similarly, if I was in this position, I would try to make the best of it. But to me, the documentary feels like we have to make this now. Please don't kill us. Say whatever you want.
I think it can be both. I agree with the point you're making, that it definitely feels like we have to make something. But I think that a lot of times, interesting stuff comes from, we're out of options. What are we gonna do? Yeah, the gobbler, man, the gobblers.
Those gobblers.
Those fucking gobblers. Yeah, and this film itself has also gone on to have a pretty substantial following. In 2002, 3 dudes went back to the town and made their own like weird little short documentary that's like a companion piece. And that's been uploaded online that you can see, and you basically catch up with all the people from the town in 2002, 20 years after the release of Vernon, Florida. Saying it's a documentary is being pretty charitable. It's more just like a guy with a camcorder walking around. But it's interesting to see the like desolation of the town, and like the tire shop just being fucking demolished, and the gobbler guy being 20 years older, decked out in full camo, being interviewed. Like there's interesting stuff if this is your fucking bag, Yeah,
well, without even watching it, that dude talking about moving his foot and cooking is fully dead.
fully dead. Yeah, rest in peace. Rest in peace. Yeah, I mean, I think we pretty much covered the stuff I wanted to talk about, which was most of the brutality of capitalism and how it drives people to do just horrible fucking things. Final thoughts on Vernon, Florida slash Nub City slash Gibtown. You want to talk about more Gibtown stuff? Talk about this Styles fella, murderer slash murderee? We could do that too. Final thoughts.
Well, I mean, we did give away a lot of the information, a lot of the details of that one, but maybe we should do that as an episode, a standalone episode at some point. But yeah, it's interesting because I feel like, you know, Nub City, Vernon, Florida, obviously there's not a whole lot of details to the story. But I still feel like it's a pretty good little example of something that I feel like is there's a pretty strong dichotomy in our country of belief surrounding the morality of desperation and the things that you will be capable of doing when you're poor. And there are many people who bring like I said before, they'll bring a moral charge to the idea of being poor and being stuck in poverty and committing crimes that are related to being poor. And, you know, I feel like that's our country is, you know, because of our financial system and our economic system, I think our country is pretty wired to generally adopt that as like mainstream thought. Like if you steal, you are a bad person. If you are poor, you just need to work harder and you won't be poor anymore. And if you're poor, it's your fault. And like that somehow makes you bad and therefore deserve to be poor. And this is a really good little story to illustrate that point, because I feel like the idea of theft is just so charged that it's hard to really have a discussion about it, because some people just, you're not going to move them. Like, you know, stealing is bad, stealing is wrong, and if you do it, you're a bad person, and that's the end of it. You're not going to budge them on that and be like, well, you know, if you're poor enough, like, stealing makes a lot of sense.
We're not quite poor enough to go steal some shoes. Not yet.
Yeah, well, I mean, that's the point. Like, I have the extreme privilege of not having to steal, so when I do it, it's for pure enjoyment.
It's for pure erotic thrill.
Yeah, for sure. So you can't, like, you can say I'm a bad person whenever I do it, but that's because I've never been in a situation where I've needed to. But you know, Vernon, Florida is interesting because it's so extreme. The idea that you would cut off your own foot, that from a top-down perspective, from 50,000 feet, when you hear about this story passingly, you're just like, these people are fucking freaks. Like, fucking all these people cutting off their feet and arms and shit to like get insurance money. Like, what fucking backwoods weirdos. And then you hear the whole Errol Morris story where it's like, oh, they tried to kill them, and there's like, these people are like violent psychopaths. That's like your knee-jerk reaction to it. And then you drill down a little bit deeper and you're like, oh, like, no, these people are like fucking desperate and poor, and they've been stuck in this for decades. And this is just this is the behavior that you will be driven to by a system that pins you down by your neck and holds you and will not let you go, will not relent. This is what happens. And it makes perfect intuitive sense. Like, as we're animals, as human beings, when put into desperate situations, we will do just about anything to survive. So it makes perfect sense. Like you said about the whole, like, caught in a trap, like a fox will chew off its leg or whatever. Like, we'll do the exact same shit. And this is just a great example to show that, because I feel like so many other things are so charged, but this is so extreme that it really kind of illustrates the point of like, oh yeah, why would somebody go to those lengths to cut off their own foot just to collect some insurance money? Maybe it's because being poor is like fucking traumatizing and awful, and something that like people are forced into by a system that like does not allow people to like move out of their economic class by like no amount of hard work would would elevate you above that. And that's a perfect recipe for people doing bizarre, desperate things. So more people should read about this story and think about it a little bit more and think about why somebody would cut off their own foot.
I'm Dave Baker.
And I'm Spandrew Spice.
This has been Deep Cuts. If you'd like to find me, you can do so on the internet at heydavebaker.com. You can find my comics, Halloween Boy, Forest Hills Bootleg Society, which is now available in bookstores everywhere, and Everyone is Tulip, the Eisner-nominated book, also available in bookstores everywhere. Spandrew, where can people find you on the internet?
Well, you can find me in a dark room staring with trepidation and fear at my own arm as I hold a hacksaw in my other hand, breathing in and out, trying to work up the courage to finally make that decision that's going to help my family move out of this desperation and push us into a place of sustainability and survivability. And you can't find me on social media because I'm not on social media. And for the first time, that's not a half joke. I deleted the TikTok app off my phone. I deleted the Twitter app off my phone, logged out of Twitter, and deleted the thing where it's on your keychain. So in order to get back into Twitter, you have to like actually go to the website and like log in and remember your password and all this shit, just creating barriers for entry for myself. And I'm not using it anymore. It's just it makes me feel bad. I feel like there's so many people on social media that just like say shit. They have no idea what they're talking about, and they just spread all this bullshit out into the world, and it's just not good for your mental health to just like have like the world's fucking speculation just like crammed into your brain on a daily basis. And so yeah, not on there. But if you want to pay your respects to the dear beloved Papa Pricey, you can go to dapricerights.com and get his book, Deadbolt AI Private Eye. You can follow us on social media. Still use that to a certain, we still have to have social media, so I'm still on to that extent. You can follow us on Facebook, Deep Cuts Podcast. You can go to our Facebook group, Deep Cuts Podcast Facebook group, where we talk about the show and make memes. You can follow us you can join our Discord server, bit.ly.com/deepcutsdiscord, where we talk about the show, make memes, and talk about other things. You can follow us on Instagram at DeepCutsPod. You can go to our website, deepcutspod.com, and click on our shop. You can get shirts and hats and things like that with Deep Cuts graphics on them. You can get our Junior Sleuth shoulder patch, and you can pick up one of our last couple of Deep Cuts Simple Code tape comics, 9-track rock opera about Napster with a 5-page full color comic. A couple of those left. You can pick them up on our shop. That's it, and that's all. Deep Cuts is a production by Boy Genius Media. If you'd like to find this show and others like it, please visit boygeniusmedia.com or deepcutspod.com.
If you want to join in on post-episode discussions, please join the Deep Cuts Podcast Facebook group. Finally, subscribe to our YouTube channel for additional video content.